Welcome back to Common Sense Crusade. I'm Calvin Robinson. Now, J.K. Rowling has challenged TV presenter and trans activist India Willoughby to sue her in a Twitter row after the author criticised celebrities who had backed the controversial trans charity Mermaids. J.K. Rowling says that the charity had achieved an unprecedented influence in the UK with the help of certain celebrities who boosted them despite red flags. I tend to agree. To continue the theme of safeguarding this hour, I'm asking the question whether or not our children need charities like Mermaids that supposedly support them with transgender issues. Joining me now is Peter Tatchell, LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, and Simon Calvert, deputy director of the Christian Institute. Peter, is JK not correct in saying that they have unprecedented influence in the UK?
I wouldn't say unprecedented. They are a charity like many others, and of course they seek to advance their interests and the work they do. And for the most part, the parents of trans children and trans children themselves say that Mermaids does a great job and has helped them and has actually given them great comfort and support, enable those trans children to lead happier, more fulfilled lives. So I think all these allegations and threats of legal action, I think, are just a bit over the top.
I've got to pull you up on that point already, because we can't on my show talk about trans children as if that is a thing that exists. Encouraging a child to think that they are in the wrong body, surely abusive way of thinking, is it not, Simon?
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of problems with Mermaids. In the past week, we've seen them having to dismiss a trustee who turned out to be a paedophile apologist. They're being investigated by the Charity Commission. They're being criticised quite rightly for dishing out damaging chest binders to children without their parents knowing. They've had a so-called moderated chat room that they ran, which they've had to close because it was appeared to be unsafe. But, even if none of that had happened, the fundamental purpose of Mermaids has to be questioned, because for them to be encouraging children to think that they are trapped in the wrong bodies, for them to be manipulating parents by holding the threat of suicide over their heads if they don't go along with their particular kind of political view of this, it's all very unpleasant. And they certainly have had an unprecedented influence, and they've been without scrutiny for a long time. Let's not forget the BBC were pushing people to Mermaids. You had that ITV documentary that was heavily, drama, Butterfly, that was heavily influenced by Mermaids.
That's your opinion, and I tend to agree with your opinion on that, Simon. But is it not the case that we should be supporting young people who feel like they are having transgender issues or dysphoria? How can we better support people if we're not sending them to charities like Mermaid? And I'll come back to you next, Peter. But Simon, if you can answer that first.
Well, yeah, of course you must support them. I mean, what the evidence shows about people experiencing gender dysphoria, this great discomfort with their sex, is that they often have a complicated mesh of mental health conditions. So, of course, they need to be properly supported. They need people who understand them, to listen to them, and people who can help them, as any good therapist does, to come to terms with reality, to come to terms with the world and themselves the way they really are. The problem with Mermaids is that they don't do that. They take the child's misapprehension that they are trapped in the wrong body, and they say, "You're right, and we're going to give you every help to try and change your body to match those feelings." That's completely approaching it the wrong way round.
OK, Peter, I take it you have a different opinion on this and you think Mermaids is a good thing. Can you expand on why you think chest binders and puberty blockers and the approaches that Mermaids promotes could be a good thing for children?
Well, first of all, Mermaids does not in any way pressure, encourage or persuade young people to be trans. It listens to young people. And we are told time and time again that we must listen to young people. When young people feel strongly a particular way, we should not dismiss that. We should listen and hear what they're saying. And of course, Mermaids and other charities, they talk through these issues with young people. They don't just accept it at face value and then try and push them into puberty blockers or chest binders. They talk it through very thoroughly, as do the parents. And often, in most cases, parents are involved with Mermaids as well. Mermaids brings in the parents, so the parents are involved in the decision-making process.
No, I've got to say at this point, what are we hearing from parents?
Let me finish, Simon. With regard to chest binders, that is true that Mermaids does provide chest binders to young trans girls. That's absolutely true. But they do so with safety instructions, and they don't just hand them out willy-nilly. They have to have evidence that that child needs them. And of course, if Mermaids did not provide chest binders, there's a very real danger that many young kids would make their own and not use them properly and safely. So I think it's very responsible.
Is there a way for a child to be using chest binders safely? That's the problem. You said Mermaids listens, but the problem could be, from my opinion, that they affirm rather than just listening. And it's not about not dismissing, but it's not about encouraging a young person in their dysphoria. Simon, what would be your alternative take on what Peter just said?
Well, I just want to say what we hear from parents is that Mermaids is the problem, that when their kids get in with Mermaids and with that worldview, the parents can feel that they lose all connection with their child. Their child is just reinforced in this kind of political approach to their mental health issues. And parents have to band together to help one another to know how to deal with the enormous pressure that they and their children come under from this ideology. So I don't think, the idea that Mermaids is a kind of a pro-parenting organisation, I don't think that's a fair account of the work that they do. No, look, I mean, Tavistock Clinic, again, you have whistleblowers from Tavistock Clinic who were saying that the kids and families who were involved with Mermaids were coming to them. And again, that Mermaids involvement was putting pressure on the clinic and people at the clinic to affirm the child in their choice of changing gender, to affirm them in their wish for puberty blockers and so on. It's a very dangerous and damaging ideology. I think we can be relieved that it's finally getting the scrutiny it deserves. But we really have to look at this whole approach to the issue of trans, not just at some of the problems of the way Mermaids is operating day to day.
Peter, do you think it's fitting Peter, do you think it's fitting that celebrities like Jamil and Emma Watson are supporting such a charity when it's a heavily contested area, and we're seeing damage from Simon rightly recommended or talked about the example of chat rooms and the damage being done there, but also puberty blockers, chest binders, all of the things that could be considered abusive by many. Do you think it's right for celebrities to be endorsing this?
Well, first of all, Simon is wrong to say that Mermaids is a political charity. It's not. This is about human rights, human dignity, respect for young people and their parents.
Which human rights is it about?
It's quite true that some parents may have disagreements and may have had bad experiences. That could well be true. But the vast majority say that they, as parents, are very happy with the way in which their children have been supported by Mermaids. It's not political, it's not pressured, it's by choice, and it's made those kids happier and better and more fulfilled.
I'm sorry, but I have to contest that as well. You can't say that it's not a political movement when it's a heavily contested ideology, and that the vast majority of people for the last 2,000 plus years have considered that you are your gender and you are born as your gender. You are either male or female. Now, to suggest that young people could be born in the wrong body and have a dysphoria about that is a very modern idea. It is a very contested idea. That makes it political. It's not settled in science.
Well, you're absolutely wrong. Trans people have been around all throughout history, going back thousands and thousands of years.
I never said that trans people haven't been around.
Yeah.
So what am I wrong about?
Trans people have been around for a long time. This is not some new ideology. This is about human dignity and respect, respecting people who are different from ourselves. And, providing there is no pressure and people are not being forced or unfairly or unwarrantedly encouraged that to be trans, I think we should respect the work that Mermaids does. And, we just have to look at the results. Most trans children and most parents of trans children say they are very happy with Mermaids, but their children's lives...
We can't back that data up either. What we can see is that there's possibly a social contagion going on when we see that the number of kids identifying as trans or with trans dysphoria at the moment is massively increasing at a rate like we have never seen before. You can sit there and say there have always been trans people, but not at the number that we're seing right now. So is it an increase because of a fad? And should we be allowing people to put their children through irreversible procedures by affirming their delusions? Is that an appropriate
method? Most of the procedures are not irreversible, and the arguments you've used about this huge increase, that's the same thing that happened or was said when gay people began to come out. people said, "Oh, where are all these gay people coming from? There never used to be gay people before. There was just a little tiny minority." Now
I'm sorry, that's a nonsense argument that no one's making. All right, Simon, I'm going to put a question to you, because we would always argue for and against. But for the most part, the most important thing here is the child, surely, Simon.
Yes, I've got to pick up on something Peter said. Peter said that most of the interventions are reversible. That's demonstrably untrue. The very reason why everybody's now so worried about puberty blockers is that it's not reversible. It causes permanent damage, and everybody's now having to admit that. And certainly in terms of surgery, that's not reversible, is it? And what are we finding now? I mean, we need to hear from the voices of detransitions, the people who have followed the Mermaids type line and deeply, deeply regret it and can't go back. They've had the hormones, they've had the surgery, and they can't undo it. And anyone who's heard those stories will know that it breaks your heart. So the idea that it's reversible is just such utter rubbish. No, we have to focus on the best interests of children. And we have to focus on listening to children and on providing them with the proper advice and, where appropriate, therapy to help them to accept themselves and to love themselves the way they are, rather than telling them that they need to pump their bodies full of drugs, have irreversible surgeries, and make themselves lifelong patients in order to try to get their bodies to match their feelings.
Therapy, not affirmation.
No child
wise words indeed.
No
Thank
child
you.
can
That was
have irreversible
LGBT
surgery.
activist Peter Tatchell, the Deputy Director of the Christian Institute Simon Calvert. Thank you both very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Mermaids has responded to the recent allegations with the following statement. We're in the midst of a targeted, cynical attack on mermaids. The safety and well-being of our service users is paramount, and our systems are designed to automatically flag anything that may be a concern. If a young person is identified as being specifically vulnerable, their post will not be shared, and in line with our safeguarding procedures, this will be escalated and actioned accordingly.